The craziest game in round 3 of the US Championship was the game between Samuel Shankland and Jeffery Xiong. This was an extremely complicated game, so do bear with me. Sam had white pieces, Jeffery had black. So let's see how this game went. We have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and Shankland plays the Scotch game. Jeffery plays this line with queen to f6, and Shankland responded with knight b3. This is not so common. Bishop e3 is the main move. So after knight b3, Jeffery played queen g6, attacking the pawn on e4 and also pressuring the g2 pawn, making it difficult to develop the light square bishop. Black also makes room for the knight to come to f6. Shankland defended the pawn f3. We have knight f6, bishop f4, bishop b4 check. Previously c3 was played, but Shankland plays king to f2, a new move, and this makes a lot of sense. White simply defends the pawn with the king and is preparing the development of the light square bishop. So Jeffery castled in this position. The pawn on c7 is hanging. It can be taken, but this seems rather dangerous with the white king still in the center. And there's always the question of what happens with d6 trapping the bishop. I quite like this move, queen to g5. It's a subtle move, taking the space left behind by white's dark square bishop. And this makes it difficult for white to try and castle manually with moves like rook f1, king g1 in the future, due to ideas like bishop c5, and after takes, the black queen will then have control of this g1 a7 diagonal. So after black castled, Samuel did not capture on c7, instead he played the move a3. But this was perhaps unnecessary. So bishop d3 right away would have been a better option, simply developing and also lining the bishop up with the queen. Because after a3, bishop e7, white actually improved the position of black's bishop, now looking at both sides of the board, and also with the potential to come to the h4 square. And this tempo wasted with a3 now makes life quite difficult for Shankland. Shankland played bishop d3, now threatening e5. So we have knight to h5, attacking the bishop. If bishop retreats, say bishop g3 or bishop to e3, then black goes d6, and he will have excellent control of the e5 square. So bishop takes c7 was played, the most challenging try. We have d6, now e5, opening up a discovery on the queen, and now Shankland might be regretting this a3 move, as Jeffery plays the move bishop to h4 check and intermezzo. King to f1, and now queen to h6. We have e takes d6. White does have two extra pawns and this passed d pawn, but at the moment d7 is adequately covered by the bishop. Jeffery played rook to e8, taking control of the open file, and white's king is feeling the heat in this position. Samuel played knight c3 development, so black can play rook to e1 check. This does win the queen. However, the attack will be weakened. White also has a rook and a minor piece, also two pawns for the queen. So this is definitely okay for white. So after knight c3, there are so many possibilities for Jeffery in this rich position. One idea for black is to go knight to f4, with the immediate threat of playing knight takes g2 and ripping open the king side. Ideas like bishop h3 also come to mind. So if pawn takes, black will play the move queen to e6, followed by capturing the pawn on h3, and this is going to give black a pretty strong initiative. So knight f4 is one possibility. b6 also comes to mind, trying to lock in this bishop, and this sets a trap. If white plays the obvious bishop e4, which attacks the knight and also threatens pawn to d7. Then black goes rook takes e4, and after knight takes, bishop a6 check, and white is forced to give up the queen, because if king g1, then queen e3 check, and queen takes f2 mate. Knight f6 is also another possibility, and this is the engine's top recommendation. With this move, black just takes control of some important squares, and black is basically arguing that he is significantly better, despite being down 2 pawns in this position. White has a big problem in coordinating his pieces, particularly the rooks. So the obvious try for white is queen d2, trying to connect the rooks. But comes bishop g5 with tempo on the queen, and queen d1 looks pretty depressing. So knight f6 also a possibility. But instead, Jeffery decides on knight to e5, which is also a pretty decent continuation. And Shankland plays knight c5, and this is a blunder. So the move knight e4 was necessary to try and block this file, because after knight c5, Jeffery played knight takes f3. Had white played the move knight to e4 on the previous move, he can now capture on f3 with the queen and all is well. But this isn't possible now, because after queen takes f3, rook to e3 is incredibly strong, and white is pretty much forced to give up his queen. If he moves the queen, for example queen d5, then comes the move queen f4 check. White would have to block. If he plays king to g1, queen f2 is mate. So what happens if pawn takes? Then comes bishop h3 check, and after king g1, queen e3 is mate. So after knight takes f3, Shankland played knight 3 to e4. Jeffery has a nice initiative, but in these kinds of sharp positions, the evaluation can easily fluctuate with a single inaccurate move. Jeffery played bishop to g4, which is a mistake, throwing away his advantage. So instead, the move f5 would have kept the initiative, and the idea is to open up the f file and further expose the king. So here knight to f6, just controlling some important squares. So note that if rook to f8, this can be met with bishop d5 check, and after bishop e6 takes king to h8, bishop f5. Black does regain the piece with the move g6, but this would expose the king. So let's go back. Bishop g4 was played. Now taking the knight with g takes f3 leads to a forced mate after bishop h3, king e2, knight f4, king e3, knight to e6 check, and knight d4 is mate. You can see that black does a great job of controlling the flight squares with his queen and bishops. So in this position, Shankland takes the opportunity to win the exchange with the move d7. Retreating the rook over to f8 would not make any sense, since black would just abandon the open file, and white can proceed to capture the knight. Capturing on h2 with the knight does end up winning the queen, but in exchange white gets a rook and 2 minor pieces for the queen. So this is actually pretty good for white. So in this position, Jeffery played his rook to e5. Shankland proceeded to win the exchange. Knight takes e5, queen d2. Black obviously doesn't want to trade queens, being down an exchange and also a pawn, so he plays queen to c6. And now Shankland plays move h3, which is another mistake. This weakens the g3 square. He could have played queen to e3, so taking control of these diagonals and controlling the dark squares around the black king. This would have been a good move, but instead h3, which weakens the square, Black can try and take advantage with the move bishop f5, indirectly challenging the g3 square. Instead, he played bishop takes d7, which is also fine. We have knight takes d7, knight takes, queen to c3, and now queen to h6, now taking control of this diagonal. So Sam is maybe slightly worse here, but he does have the exchange and an extra pawn, so this is still playable. But he now commits a crucial blunder. He plays the move g4. Probably afraid of black pushing f5 at some point and then playing knight g3. But this is actually not really an issue, since white is already up the exchange, and the resulting capture on h1 will be beneficial for white since he has gotten rid of that bad rook. In addition, g4, the move g4 further exposes the already exposed king. Jeffery can take advantage of this with the move queen f4 check, leading to a decisive advantage. And now knight d to f6, trying to remove the defender of the f2 square. Queen f2 mate threatened, so rook to h2. That makes room for the king. And now knight to d5, followed by knight to e3, would give black a strong attack. But Jeffery didn't go for this. Instead, he played the move f5, which opens up more lines. Rook to e8. And another crucial mistake by Shankland. He played the move queen c4 check. So rook to h2 was the best move to give more protection on the second rank. And with the queen still on c3, black cannot play queen to e3 and try and infiltrate, as white has to move bishop c4 check, followed by picking up the queen. The best continuation would be king to h8, stepping out of this diagonal, and queen to d2, challenging the black queen on the c1 h6 diagonal. But instead, queen c4 check. After king h8, another mistake by Shankland, which is quite understandable since he was under time pressure. Rook g1. Rook h2 again would have given more resistance, but instead rook g1. Jeffery now plays the queen to e3, threatening queen to f3 check and mate on next move. So rook to g2 was necessary to try and block on the f2 square. But now knight f4, and black's attack is huge. After rook to h2, knight takes h3, now threatening queen to g1, followed by picking up the rook. So Shankland played king g2. Knight f4 check, king h1. Jeffery now didn't face much difficulties in converting this attack. Let's see how he does it. He plays queen to f3 check, king g1, queen g4, king h1, queen to f3 check, a repetition of moves to preserve some time on the clock. King to g1, and now bishop to d8, now aiming for the g1 a7 diagonal. Shankland played rook to f1, bishop b6 check, knight to f2, queen g3 check, king h1, queen to f3 check, repetition of moves again, as both players were short on time. King to g1, there are many ways to win this. Jeffery, being short on time, decides to eliminate the rook to take away any potential pressure on h7. And now Shankland plays queen f4, stopping queen g3 check. Knight f6, this is now move 40, and both players reach the time control. However, black has a huge advantage because of this very annoying pin on the knight. There are also threats like knight to g4, and there's not much that white can do in this position. The best defense was to play queen h2 and try to play this ending down the exchange. Shankland, however, played the move bishop b5, attacking the rook. However, rook to e4 finishes off the game, In this position, Samuel Shankland resigned as mate is inevitable. White can play a check, but black simply blocks with knight g8. And bishop e2 stops rook g4. But rook to h4 now threatens mate on h1, and there's no defense for Shankland. So a great game by Jeffery Xiong, and 2 out of 2 with the black pieces. This win puts him in the lead with 2.5 out of 3. I hope you enjoyed this crazy and complicated game. Thanks for watching and have a great day ahead.